Well, for those that are here that have known me for a long time, you now know how I've spent the last 3 years of my life. And I just want to say it was such a privilege to get to share Frank's story with you today, and to get to be part of this group of wonderful people that reported his story so that people across the world can learn about what happened to him and so many other people during this really dark time in our history. You have to forgive me, I don't usually stay in and watch the end because as much as I know and love Frank, it's still, as many times as I've seen it, it's still hard for me to watch. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
How did you originally get interested in the Holocaust in this work?
It's kind of one of those things in life that just happened. I was an avid reader as a child, still am. And my mom had a book from the 1978 Holocaust miniseries that was on MBC. Some of you probably saw it. It was a fictional story, so it was a novel that was written by an author to go along with the miniseries. And I saw it, it looked interesting, I read it, and from there I just kept reading. And I went to a little high school in Pennsylvania that was a lot like Riverhead's, but they had a Holocaust history class, History of Nazi Germany it was actually called. And I took that, and then I went to Kutztown University in Pennsylvania and took a class there with a professor who was phenomenal. He ended up introducing me to Elie Wiesel my junior year, who wrote Night, which some of you have read. And from there I had the opportunity to go to graduate school. I was teaching in Pennsylvania, in Westchester, which is 45 minutes away from where I was teaching. And I got to know some of the survivors in our local community, and it just kept going from there. And I just became more invested in it and felt a need to really share this history with people. And I'm proud to say that next year, Robert E. Lee is going to have a Holocaust and Genocide elective, so I'm really excited to bring it down here now. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Really trivial question, but I was curious, the decision for typography that all the number ones with the eyes, what was that?
Well, in the course of a lot of the research I've done for my master's program, and then also when we were doing research for the film, a lot of the primary documents that the Nazis created, that was the type font that they used. And so as we were discovering these documents, we did a trace through the International Tracing Service, which is run by the Red Cross, and the Holocaust Museum in Washington is one of their partners. We started looking at these documents, and the director of the film, who was a fellow teacher, he was the creative mind of it, and he said, we can use this font in the film. And so that's where it came from.
How did you pick this one man?
Frank kind of picked us. It was, again, one of those things in life. Since 2006, I've been doing professional development work with the Holocaust Museum in Washington, first as a participant, and now as one of their presenters. And in 2010, I applied for a fellowship program. And by that point, Sean and I had been teaching together for 2 years. He teaches media and communications, and I was teaching history, and so we actually began to co-teach a film and literature and Holocaust class together for our high school students. And he was a newer teacher. He had spent 15 years in the film industry. And the year I applied to go to the fellowship, he didn't have enough experience, and we were disappointed because we had hoped to do it together. But the museum said, well, there's another program. It's going to be in Indianapolis in June of 2010. And we encouraged him to apply because he had already done the intro program called the Arthur and Rochelle Belfer Conference. And they said he should apply for the Belfer Next Step. And so he did, and he flew to Indianapolis at the end of June for this 3-day conference. And on the second day, Frank was the survivor speaker that the Holocaust Museum brought in to speak. And as Sean says, it was love at first sight because Frank walked in the door carrying a Mac. And Sean is a huge Apple guy. And he was just so enamored with Frank and his personality. And both he and I have been privileged to hear from a lot of survivors. Being outside of Philadelphia, there's a pretty big survivor community there. And when they would share their stories with us or with our students, they would tell us about their families that had perished during the war. And if they were lucky, they had 1, maybe 2 photographs of their families. Frank had hundreds. And he was sharing them with Sean and the group during this presentation. And Sean said after he finished, the first question he asked was, where did you get all these photographs? And Frank told the story about Anda, the housekeeper. And then Sean said his next question was, would you like to make a movie? And that night he called me, and as my husband and I joked, it's a phone call that changed my life. So that's how we found Frank.
Does Frank or his current descendants practice Judaism?
Frank actually, when he came to the States, he started to explore Judaism a little bit more, but his wife is not Jewish. But they have 2 sons, and one of the sons married a woman who was Jewish and converted, and so he's raising his children in Judaism, and then his other son does not. He's Lutheran. But Frank's very supportive and encouraging of his grandchildren exploring their Jewish faith, I think kind of a little bit to make up for the fact that he did not as a child. And so he's been very, very encouraging of that.
So the housekeeper kept all these photographs kept the same for the family?
Yes, ma'am. She kept the photographs safe. The family, as I had mentioned at the beginning, was very privileged. They had a summer villa in Conovice, which you saw in some of the photographs. And during the war, she stayed in the summer villa with the photographs and the family belongings. And then after the war, when they came back, she helped them get their apartment back and return their belongings to them. And then when they fled Prague in 1949, they filled their suitcases mainly full of photographs. And that was one of the really kind of neat things. I joke about I could make a movie about making the movie, because so many neat things came out in the process that you don't see in the film. And one of the really neat things that happened is about 2 years ago, May 2 years ago, when we were a year into production, we got an email in broken English from a man who claimed that he knew Frank from Prague. And when we put it through Google Translate, we determined he was born in 1964, but here he was the great-nephew of Anda. And he said that he grew up visiting her in the summer villa, hearing stories about this family who had went through the Holocaust and that only the father and son survived, and that they went to America. And after the wall fell and communism started to leave Eastern Europe and they got the internet, he started to try and find Frank. But first he was searching for Misha Eisenstein, because Eisenstein was Vilma's maiden name. Then when he found out his last name was Grunwald, then he was searching for Misha Grunwald, and he couldn't find him because when Frank moved to America, he went by Frank. And then one day his wife was at work and happened to do a search and hit the website for the movie, and so he sent us an email, and we were able to reunite them via email. And here he had the original love letter that Frank's mother wrote Frank's father. And so for a period of time, Frank had both letters in his possession. Thomas and his 19-year-old son came to America for the premiere. And they were the quintessential crazy Europeans. We had so much fun entertaining them. Frank sadly had a heart attack 3 weeks before the premiere, but he's doing great now. So he didn't make it to Pennsylvania for the premiere, so we had to send them out to Indianapolis to meet him. And for Thomas, it was really fulfilling a lifelong dream of getting to meet Misha. And that was a neat aside that happened.
And also with the sketches, I went to Prague and to
Theresienstadt, yeah.
I went there, and are those sketches Frank's or the students, or are those from that museum from?
When you saw the sketches on the screen, if there were no subtitles to them, they were student work. And then the stuff that you saw that was done by other survivors, it was tagged at the bottom. There was a scrapbook that came from Theresienstadt, and there was one other image that was done in Theresienstadt, and then the rest were done by survivors after the war.
It was amazing. I mean, the walls covered with, the handmade art by these children. And like we was talking about the fantasy, that's what they did. There's one of Snow White and some of the dwarves. It was like these little, homey pictures that people did. But then there's this other room that was just like ceiling to floor of children that were, thought it was from killed.
Yeah, it's a beautiful memorial there.
It is. It's amazing.
Any other questions?
First of all, I want to applaud you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
And obviously your heart is filled with it. I read a study recently in the Holocaust Museum expecting research dealing with ghettos and camps, lots of things. They expected to find 7,000, they came up with 42,000.
Yes, sir.
That's amazing. How come it took so long to come up with that?
Well, although the Germans did excellent record keeping during the war, a lot of the records were also seized by the Russians when they liberated from the East and were taken back and put into archives and were largely unreachable. And only in the last 10 years have the records really started being uncovered and released. Also, some of the records were destroyed during the war, so they've had to do a lot of retracing. But in Germany now, there is a tremendously large archive that there's still, I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of documents that they're just discovering on a daily basis. So they're able to further identify the scope of the horror of the Holocaust. And the two researchers that are working on the project, Martin Dean and Jeff McGargy, they said they've discovered, camps that literally held 5 people, but they were determined to be camps, and companies would get workers from the Germans. They would pay the Germans for these slave laborers and then house them outside their facilities. And in the German system, they were named camps. And so they're starting to identify those that people didn't really know about because they weren't on a large scale. They were dissolved by the time the liberating forces came in. And a lot of the people that were in them didn't survive, or if they did, they didn't know how to identify them. And so that's some of what the research is uncovering now.
Did they ever find out what happened to Willie?
No, they didn't. Willie's an interesting complex story. Willie was a convicted murderer from Germany. So he was a German criminal prisoner that was put in Auschwitz, and they put many of those people in leadership roles because they were particularly sadistic and they thought they would make good capos in the camps. The gentleman who was the third screenwriter in the film, Zachary Haupt, he's an English teacher, and his wife has been taken by that part of the story, and she always kind of has wondered what happened to Willie, so she's doing her own little research. There were 6 million Jews killed in Europe during the Holocaust. It was approximately 2/3 of European Jewish population. So you could say that 3 million survived, but of that 3 million, some had gotten out before the war even started and before the Holocaust began on a large scale. So it's really tough to say definitively how many there were.
What's that concentration camp, the
Trachenstadt.
They said that 3 or 4 people escaped. They went on a ledge at night and were able to escape. Do you know that story?
I don't know that specific story. I mean, there's people that escaped from all of the camps, and there's I won't say there's tons of stories. There's not enough, but there are many stories of escape, and I'm not really actually familiar with that one.
What do you think about the rapidly growing number of Holocaust deniers?
I think it's disturbing and scary. I talk to my students about it, but we don't spend too much time on it because honestly I don't think they deserve the time. But I do let my students know that there are a lot of seemingly reputable appearing websites out there that are actually run by Holocaust deniers, and they suck you in by providing science and statistics and things that make it sound very believable. I think it's a tremendously scary phenomenon, and I think by making young people and making the communities around the United States aware and around the world aware of the Holocaust and what happened, hopefully it gives them the tools to say to those deniers, I saw this, I heard this guy's story, and it did happen. And so the mission of the film, we made the film for 3 reasons. The first was to preserve Frank's story. Sean was also captivated by the fact that at the time he met Frank had 4 grandchildren who were all under the age of 8 years old. And we figured Frank just turned 80 in September, so he'll be 81 this year. We figured by the time he gets to the age where they're really going to be able to know what happened, he may not be around. So we wanted to preserve the story for him. We also wanted to create a meaningful learning experience for our high school students. And then the third goal, which is really where we're at now, is to make this movie available to high school and university educators across the nation, free of charge. This project's entirely nonprofit. I have never collected a paycheck from it, neither have any of the other principals that were involved in it have they collected a paycheck. It was community funded. We actually made it on a budget of $13,000, which I don't know if anybody has a film background in here, but I was told by Hollywood producer Gary Getzman, who made Silence of the Lambs, that if we would have made this out there, it would have been closer to $1 million, which made me think maybe I'm in the wrong business. Anyway, so we wanted to create this film and get it to teachers free of charge. And so to date, we've distributed over 1,500 copies to teachers and university educators across the United States and in 13 countries worldwide. In 2 weeks, we have our first international premiere in Zagreb, Croatia, where it's going to be showing in the Zagreb Jewish Film Festival. And then at the end of the month, we have a premiere in Australia. Sadly, they're not paying for my ticket to go to either of those places. But if you know a teacher, please let them know about our website. It's www.mishasfugue.com. They can go on. If they don't live locally, it's simply the cost of $5 to cover shipping and handling. We also do, if anybody knows of someone that isn't a teacher but would be interested in a copy, we have a donation section on our website, and we sell copies for $20, and all of the proceeds go back into the project, and it allows us to show the film in different places, to make additional copies to distribute to teachers, and to do the marketing and promotions to get the story out there. So if you know anybody that would be interested in learning more about it, we have a mailing list on our website, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and things like that. So please help me share Frank's story with others, and you can let them know about it. So, any other questions?
Yeah, have the Lehigh students had an opportunity to see this?
The students in my classes and several of the other history classes have. We haven't done, I have this secret hope that Frank will be well enough to maybe come next school year once I'm teaching the class, and that they can actually meet Frank and then maybe see the film on a wider scale. Yes, sir.
It looked like maybe there was just, at least in the film, you guys hinted that there was a time or two where he was maybe overcome by emotion.
Other than reading the letter, which was so emotional for all of us, my husband isn't a particularly emotional person, and he'll even say that was probably among the 7 most difficult minutes of his life, because we had one take, and none of us could even sniffle because the camera would have picked that up. During the reading of the letter, and then when he was speaking about the death march, those are the 2 times. And the thing about the part with the death march, and I've interviewed many survivors with the work that I do with the Holocaust, I wasn't expecting it, and it was really, really hard for us at that part, because I sat there for 7 straight hours and interviewed him, and there were so many times, and I'm like, okay, if he's gonna cry, this is gonna be it. And I was ready for it, and I wasn't ready for it when it happened. And initially he didn't want it in the film, but Frank's an artist at heart, and he realized that it really was the spot to put it in, so we did.
He's so talented with all of the different artwork that he completed and that we saw. Does he sell that?
No, actually he doesn't. He designed appliances, so if you have any old GE appliances from the 60s, 70s, and 80s in your house, I have a wonderful avocado green dishwasher that I think he might have designed. But he's never, other than doing design work that's sold in that fashion, he hasn't sold his art. His house is graced with it. That statue is actually currently in his living room, and he's talking about making a follow-up piece of a mother and a child. But no, it's just there on display. It's amazing.
Does he still live in Forest Hills?
No, he lives in outside of Indianapolis in Fishers, Indiana. So, any other questions? If anybody wants a copy, I do have some copies with me today, and you can come down and see me. We do, as I said, to non-teachers, they're $20. Or if you know of somebody that would want one, like I said, please send them to our website. And if you think of any questions after you leave, my email's on the website. Feel free to drop me an email. Or if you know of anybody that would have questions, please feel free to send it my way. And I wanted to thank Rabbi Joe for having me here today.